Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Reeder, All Remote Campaign Manager at GitLab, and I'm here speaking with Eric Johnson, Executive Vice President of Engineering, also at GitLab. And we're going to talk today about remote leadership and why that is different from traditional leadership, what remote leaders need to know. So, Eric, hello, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great to have you. So let's jump right in and start by talking about how remote leadership is generally different from leading an in-office team.
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the things that comes to mind is my wife's field, psychology, and she's taught me quite a bit about it. And one of the most significant things I've learned from her is how people learn. And so the primary way people learn is really by observing the behaviors that the leaders they're around are modeling. And secondly is what is coming out of those leaders' mouths, what they're telling them to do. And then a distant third is sort of negative incentives or punishments, and that really doesn't work at all. So I wouldn't advise doing that. But I think leaders commonly forget about the first one. Another way to say it would be, walk the walk and talk the talk. That sort of phrase. But the idea, for instance, is, if you're telling them, hey, take vacation time or something like that, if you're not doing that yourselves, they're going to get a strong signal that it's really not okay to do that. So you need to be cognizant of that and not just take it, but almost do what some leaders find uncomfortable, which is advertise things like that. So I happen to be about to take a staycation next week. And I've got it in my staff meeting, and I keep reminding people, whether it's a skip level meeting or something like that, hey, heads up, I'm taking a vacation. It's not because I'm being flashy and letting them know that I get to take time off. Is that I'm signaling, hey, it's genuinely okay. We're telling people to take vacation, but also we're doing it ourselves, and that they should as well, to take care of their mental health, their family, and these other things. And I think this becomes even more important in a remote environment because you have less time in front of your employees. And so you have to really pay close attention to those moments where you are in front of them and make sure you're modeling the things that you're telling them you want them to do. So that's one. The other thing that seems to be unique about remote work is that, I view detecting burnout as a management and a leadership responsibility. And that is that much harder to see in a remote environment. When you're in person or on premise, you see behaviors like in the engineering context where someone is showing up 5 minutes late to the stand up, every day in a week or something like that. And you pick up on these subtleties. You don't have those sort of subtle avenues to get that information. And so you need to be more deliberate. You need to be asking those questions in one-on-ones, and you need to be looking for other behaviors. And you really need to be coaching your employees to manage their own time and their own burnout, and schedule a walk in the afternoon, or as I mentioned, take vacation time and whatnot. But be cognizant that that's going to become more of a challenge, is making sure your employees don't burn themselves out. Another thing is when you're remote, you really have to focus on asynchronous work. People need to be able to work independently on things. And so you have to focus on work breakdown, take a large project, break it up into chunks, something that someone can take offline for half a day, a week, and come back with a result, and then integrate that result with the pieces that their teammates have been working on so that you complete the project together. So work breakdown or work shaping is that much more important in a remote organization. And when people are working asynchronously, you have to be cognizant of, every time you're faced with a challenge or a new workflow, you have to think about, like, how can we get this to work in an asynchronous fashion? But then also be cognizant that when that stops working, you do have to use synchronous modes of communication, like a relatively expensive Zoom meeting. And I say expensive because if you've got people in different time zones, you have to make sure all awake and working at the same time, and that can be hard to achieve. You don't want to do that very often, or more often than you need to. So the idea is be async sort of by default, work hard to create async workflows for new challenges, and then be cognizant of when it stops working for you and when you need to fall back to relatively more expensive modes of communication. And then another thing that we see, because people happen to be going remote in sort of emergency fashion currently, is there's an instinct amongst managers that people might not be working as hard, and that they should purchase some form of employee monitoring software. And what I would coach leaders to understand is that we actually see the opposite behavior. We're seeing people work much harder than usual, which means I advise people, it's a natural instinct to have, but skip the monitoring software. And we should actually focus on is coaching people to not work so hard that they're burning themselves out. There's a lot of stressors going on in the current environment. And you want people to be productive over long time spans, not in sort of fits and starts or short bursts of artificial productivity. So be cognizant of that, skip the monitoring software and focus on managing burnout, coaching vacation time, those other things I mentioned.
Yeah, and I think that, the wish to monitor employees comes from a good place. It's wanting to make sure that you're leading effectively and that people are able to do their work, that they're able to be productive, and that goals are going to be met. But it's different in the remote environment. So when a leader is working through this transition or getting ready to lead a distributed team, what are some ways they can educate themselves and become more knowledgeable and prepared?
Yeah, that's well said. I would say it's just it's sort of a crutch you can lean on when you're in an on-premise office environment. It's natural to use the fact that you can sort of see the production floor as part of your management style, and just be aware that you won't have that when you go remote, and you need to build a different set of skills to manage the productivity and engagement of your team. I think the GitLab handbook is a great resource. We publish it for ourselves, but for transparency, we make it available to everybody. And there's a lot of information in there. I would caveat it and say that we're all remote and we've been doing this a long time. So there is a level of detail in there that may not be useful for you, depending on what time horizon you plan to be remote or what your long-term goals are. So try to focus on the things that are really important when you're doing this for the first time, or if you're doing it sort of in an emergency fashion. Remote is new, so while there's hundreds of hours and business schools devoted to how to manage or how to lead traditional companies, there's not as much content out there. So aside from the GitLab handbook, lots of videos and other types of publishing that's going on, don't forget to talk to your network. And so reach out on LinkedIn, and sort of mine the knowledge of the people you've connected with throughout your career, and try to draw from them what's working for them, and then integrate that into your organization. Also, don't skip the opportunity to do this internal to the company. It's not just what other companies are doing, but it's about what other leaders in your organization are doing. And one of the things that happens at a remote company is silos sort of naturally develop, because you're not, you don't have those opportunities at the water cooler, in the hallway, at the lunch table, to understand what's going on in different functions. So you have to be a lot more deliberate about broadcasting what your functional area is doing. You want to encourage other leaders to do the same, and then make sure you and your people are consuming that information. So one of the things we've done at GitLab is we've developed this process around daily group conversation. So a group conversation is any sort of functional bit of the org. They do a short presentation, and then it hopefully quickly goes into sort of a Q&A about the things that they're working on, their priorities in the moment, and how maybe what they need from other groups. And so, and this is specifically meant to take the place of the fact that you're not getting that sort of organically from an office environment. So I encourage leaders to be very deliberate about that cross communication, and making it happen in a somewhat formalized way.
Yeah, well said. That's an excellent recommendation. And I do love those calls. And it also provides a way for people throughout the company to get a little bit of an idea of what's happening. What are some other specific actions that leaders can take? Say they're entering a remote transition, or planning to take on a remote team. What are a few specific things they can do right away?
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge that communication is a challenge. It's a challenge at any company. But I think it becomes more of a challenge in remote. I mean, we're big believers that being all remote is a net benefit to the company, but it doesn't mean every aspect gets easier. And I think this is one of those individual aspects that gets harder. So we've had to strategize around it. So one of the things we say in engineering is we need managers and leaders to do what we call multimodal communication. So everything that is important that they need to communicate out to their teams, they need to be comfortable saying it 3 times in 3 different ways, let's say. And the point of diminishing returns is really when they start to feel like they're repeating themselves, it's probably just far enough. And so we say that, if you do multimodal communication, you have to work really hard. And even then, you probably realistically only reached about 80% of people. And when that change becomes real, you should still expect that one person at least to raise their hand and say, hey, I wasn't informed. And that you've done your best. If it's not you that says, oh, we did broadcast this out, it's one of the person's peers that says it to them. That's probably the best you can do. In fact, for something really important a while ago, we did a new process we called an ACK, or acknowledgement. And we literally set up a Google form, and it had a description of what we needed people to understand, whether I acknowledge it or I don't acknowledge this and I need to ask questions before I'm comfortable doing that. And the intent was literally get to 100% of people. And the nice thing about having a Google form is we could sort of track that curve. And sure enough, with a couple weeks of multimodal communication, we reached roughly about 80% of people. So the 80-20 rule was a good guess there. And then it took another 80% of the total time to get to those remaining 20% of people. So communication is really hard. It's not unique to GitLab or being an all remote company, but you do have to work harder in the remote context for sure. Other specific actions I could think of are, make sure employees are investing in their workspace. Not everybody has an office at home. If you've got an employee who is, let's say, sitting on their couch, typing like this on their laptop, they're not going to be comfortable. They're not going to be productive. So I'd encourage you to look at your expense policy. It is a business expense. I would advocate, and make sure people are investing in having a nice webcam, having good lighting, having a workspace. Maybe it's even outside of their home if they don't have the space in their home, if it's safe for them to do that. And to treat that as a replacement for the benefits you'd give them if they were in the office. The other thing is that your version of your documentation culture is really important. We've all been in those meetings where people are, maybe it's a design change or something like that, and you realize you're talking past one another. Everybody's got different ideas about what the topic is in their head, and then you have a designer come in with an artifact that everybody could look at, and suddenly it crystallizes. You're all talking about the same thing, and you can suddenly make progress. The same thing is really important in other contexts. And so you need to work on your documentation culture. So you've got those artifacts, you've got the written version of whatever that process is or whatever that product change is, and it'll anchor those conversations. And another thing is, I think a lot of people view some sort of hybrid remote model as an iteration towards going all remote. But I think having an on-premise office is easy in the ways we've described, and being all remote is also easy because it's a level playing field. Hybrid is actually sort of a danger zone in between those two things. And if you're treating it as a way to potentially go all remote, you need to be cognizant that it's actually more difficult than all remote. So for instance, if you have a team that needs to be on premise, maybe you've got a hardware team and they need to be in the office because they've got their hardware in the loop simulators or something like that, and they're joining calls, they might be tempted to go into that video conferencing room, sit around the table, but what happens experience-wise is the audio is always bad because half the team is usually far away from the mic, and the team is laughing about inside jokes, something they shared at lunch or something like that, and then the people who are truly remote are sort of unintentionally excluded from what becomes the company culture. So a best practice, if you're going to do hybrid, is to treat your calls, even if they're sort of hybrid, as all remote. So ask those people who happen to be co-located to remote in from their own computers with their own headsets and their own audio, and then you'll create that level playing field and not unintentionally exclude anybody.
Yeah, that's a huge, I think, and very current misconception about remote is that hybrid can be in transition easily. There are a lot of things that we need to consider, and we're sort of learning those as we go, a lot of subtleties about this operation. Anything else that leaders should be aware of that leaders may not know or that they should test out?
Yeah, I would say being a metrics-driven organization is really important. I think it becomes important for every company when you get to a certain size, particularly in terms of headcount. I wouldn't advise that, a 40-person company with a 10-person engineering team invests a lot of time in their productivity metrics because, you can rely on the stand-up and these other things to make sure that everybody's aligned and doing the right thing. But when you scale up into the, hundreds, let alone thousands of people range, if you're not using metrics to manage to at least some extent, you're going to miss trends. And so when that inflection point is triggered, if you're remote, it becomes that much more important to keep people in line. Or maybe the other way to think of it is that if there's an inflection point for you, it moves up. Almost tipped over my water there. It would happen earlier in that time frame because you're all remote. And so metrics, again, they allow you to confirm your instincts. They'll also tell you things that you are missing wherever you have blind spots. And when people are distributed and they're working most of the day independently, not in the same room with one another, if they can look at a chart, they can understand what they need to do, particularly when they encounter an ambiguous situation. I'm confronted with some A/B decision that we didn't anticipate. What do I do here, whether I'm designing a process or writing some code? If they understand the metric that you're optimizing for, they'll usually make the right A/B decision and get through that ambiguous situation.
Yeah, very well said. Excellent insight. Excellent insights throughout. I really appreciate your time sharing this knowledge with all of GitLab and also with our learners at Coursera. So thank you very much. And it's been great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Like most people, I started my career in a traditional office environment. Transitioning to working remotely was an adjustment not only to my personal working style, but also to my expectations. One of the most surprising things I had to learn was that people are still learning how to do remote well. Even though GitLab has been a remote company since the beginning, we are still iterating and developing best practices. Remote work is relatively new. It doesn't have the benefit of centuries of trial and error that co-located businesses can draw from. As an example, early in GitLab's history, our investors were very worried because there weren't any other remote companies operating at scale. Is it possible to scale remotely? It's still a question we get all the time. But of course, we were able to show that it is possible, and in fact, we now think it scales much better than a co-located organization. Still, we didn't know until we tried. Wherever you are now, plan to be in the process of going remote for some time. Not only will you have to implement strong change management, but along the way, you will also have to iterate and adjust your plan based on new information. In 2020, many of the tech giants announced they were going remote. Facebook employs 50,000 people and it gave itself a timeline of 5 to 10 years for the transition. On the other end of the spectrum, Twitter, with about 5,000 employees, created a remote work option effective immediately and started working on a long-term set of practices to be implemented over months or years. The process of adopting remote practices is going to be very different for every organization, every leadership team, and every company culture. Your plan and your timeline are up to you. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at pathways and stages you can expect to move through. We're also going to talk about models that don't work so you can avoid some common traps.
By this point in the course, you should be ready to start customizing your approach, and that's exactly what we're going to do next. This lesson will comprehensively detail the major types of remote team structures. How will you know what structure is right for you? Start by asking some questions to clarify your expectations. The first thing to understand is how you're implementing remote work into your team structure. Will everyone be remote, or a certain percentage of team members? Is that determined by their job function or their role, or is it more connected to their geographic location? Then, think about what people need on an individual basis. Can they actually do their job without being tied to a physical job site? How are you ensuring people will have access to the things they need to do their jobs and advance in their careers? And how will you make sure they're happy and working well? We've identified at least 10 common types of team structures, but we'll focus on the top 5 here. In this lesson, we'll give you information on each of them to help you choose a model that works for your organization. Keep in mind that you can transition from one model to another over time. A sustained, healthy, iterative approach to remote is more achievable than attempting to go from zero to mastery overnight.
Let's review each of the 5 major team structures in some more detail. If you'd like to go on a deeper dive, please see the linked resources for even more information. As a baseline, let's look at a fully co-located team. This is an organization that doesn't allow any remote work. This may be determined by the industry, by the type of work being performed, by the obstacles and cost preventing remote work, or by simple preference. For example, the nature of some work is that it must be done in person. Or for industries such as banking, the work could be done remotely if not for the risk and cost of updating infrastructure and security that was not designed for remote access to sensitive information. In some cases, leadership may assess the possibility of remote work and decide it's not right for their team. And in other cases, the transition to remote can simply be too challenging to undertake. In early 2020, many workplaces faced an unprecedented challenge in the form of a global pandemic, which caused most people who were able to avoid in-person office work to do so. For no remote companies, this was a much greater challenge than for organizations that were already remote friendly. Excluding remote work also excludes some people, making it more challenging to create an inclusive and diverse workplace. It can also lead to a difficult decision for people who live further from the office or who can't fit a long commute into their day. And for people who do choose to commute, that choice can lead to dissatisfaction. However, there are many benefits to co-located work. The primary benefit is that there's a wealth of experience, tradition, and education you can draw on to run your company. This also translates into shared expectations. New hires usually have a good idea of what to expect in your workplace. It's also easier to communicate, both formally and informally, in an in-person environment. Likewise, it's easier to keep an eye on your team members' attendance and activities. All of this adds up to a stronger culture that's much more easy to build and reinforce. Now let's look at the next team structure. Remote allowed is a very common model throughout the world and across many industries. It's quite simple. The organization maintains office space for all team members, but permits them to work remotely sometimes. Most people spend most of their time in the office, with remote work as an exception to the rule. Remote allowed teams typically treat it as a benefit, as a perk, or as a compromise for employees requesting schedule flexibility. Leadership recognizes that the ability to work outside the office can sometimes help people sync their professional and personal needs, raising satisfaction and retention. The main challenges in implementing a remote allowed model are around equity and security. Do all team members have the same flexibility? Does everyone have adequate equipment or workspace to be able to take advantage of the opportunity? Or are people transporting their work computers, which may raise security risks? And then there's the challenge of scheduling meetings to account for everyone's telework days, which are often rotating. However, many employers successfully overcome these challenges and receive the benefits of a happier workforce, fewer working hours lost to errands, and a recruiting perk to attract new team members. In the hybrid remote model, most team members work together in a physical office, while some people are remote some or all of the time. Hybrid remote is quickly becoming one of the most popular team models, particularly for organizations who are transitioning back to the office following global shutdowns. Many organizations were working this way before COVID-19, and many will continue to use hybrid remote models. As we will discuss throughout this course, despite its widespread popularity, hybrid remote is the most challenging structure to execute well. There are many reasons to adopt a hybrid remote structure. For example, you may be expanding your coverage to be available across more hours, more time zones, or more geographical areas. Companies may send an advanced team to a new region, or may establish a long-term remote presence for a limited set of tasks. In other models, companies have a core headquarters but support an extended network of resellers, distributors, or salespeople who live in the same areas as their customer bases. And increasingly, employers offer this as a benefit to certain employees who negotiate for the opportunity to choose their location. Overall, this is the team structure with the most challenges to overcome. The greatest challenges center around providing an equitable experience for remote and co-located team members. Remote team members may struggle to access information they need, as well as career and personal development opportunities. They may feel disconnected and underappreciated if they sense they're being left out of experiences that happen in the office. And they may not have managers that understand and support the needs of remote professionals. Meanwhile, in-office team members may feel inferior in different ways. They may see others being allowed to work remotely and wonder why it isn't an option for them. They may wonder why it's their responsibility to lobby for the ability to work remotely. And if they do gain remote work privileges, they may worry about needing to demonstrate that they're still just as productive, or risk being made an example of. For more on the challenges of a hybrid remote structure, please see the linked resources. All that said, many organizations will still attempt a hybrid remote structure. That's because it looks great on paper. The potential benefits include the significant cost savings from not needing to open satellite offices or relocate team members. And for companies based in areas with a high cost of living, there are also savings from paying comparable salaries balanced for less costly areas. It's certainly beneficial to many organizations to have team members distributed across time zones and regions, and if hybrid remote is done well, it can raise employee happiness. That covers the 3 types of team structures that work office first. In the next video, we'll look at team structures where the office is minimized or doesn't exist at all. In the previous video, we looked at 3 team structures: no remote, remote allowed, and hybrid remote. Now let's look at a team structure that prioritizes remote work. Remote first teams optimize their company for remote. They create documentation, policies, and workflows that function on the assumption that 100% of the organization is remote, even if some continue to occasionally visit a company-owned office. Teams that choose to be remote first typically have leadership that believe in and support remote work. These teams typically work in a field that doesn't require any work to be done in person. By making remote the default, they gain a significant recruiting benefit and generally higher employee morale. However, they may prefer to have some in-person meetings for leadership, board members, or even specific teams within the organization. Remote first is relatively new, and it can have all of the same challenges as working all remotely. That includes the communication and management challenges we've mentioned previously, which affect all remote teams. It also includes the risk of remote employees feeling lonely, left out, or burned out. Other challenges might include a feeling of being left out for team members who are not able or invited to join in-person meetings. Or you may find that some team members rely too much on the office without adopting a fully remote-first mindset. The benefits of this structure are also similar to those of an all-remote team: happier employees, higher performance, and the ability to hire the best people around the world. And while there is a cost associated with maintaining at least one office space, that may be somewhat offset by the savings from paying locally adjusted salary rates. Now we've reached the final team structure, all remote. Since the all remote team type is the basis for this course, I won't go into great detail here. As you probably guessed, an all remote team has no offices, no set working hours, and a globally distributed team. These companies are traditionally in the tech or knowledge industries, but we are seeing companies from other industries test the waters of remote operations. For this model to function, all of the organization's work must be able to be done remotely. Leadership understands and supports remote work, including its benefits and its unique requirements. This model comes with a significant recruiting benefit, allowing you to hire the best people in almost any location. And if you hire globally, your company can operate 24 hours per day and often 7 days per week. We've also described the challenges of all remote previously in this course. To recap, this structure comes with significant challenges in communication and management, requiring focus, strong policies, and training. It can also be more challenging to create a shared culture, which affects employee satisfaction. Employees are more susceptible to loneliness and burnout, and because a truly global team will operate best asynchronously, there are slowdowns throughout communication and work cycles. Typically, an all-remote company understands those challenges and puts strategies in place to counteract them. The benefits of this structure make it all worthwhile: much higher employee satisfaction and performance, increased hiring opportunities, and the ability to create a globally diverse team chosen from the very best candidates. And there are significant cost savings from not needing to maintain any office space and from paying locally adjusted rates. Every organization will have a structure that works best for its needs. By this point, you may have realized that your organization has already adopted some remote work practices, and you may have identified a potential next step for how you may be able to strengthen your remote work offering. If you'd like to continue learning more, please see our linked resources where you'll find additional detail, including more subtypes and variations on these structures. I hope this information inspires you to choose the model that will best enable your team.